everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In today's session, we're continuing this journey with the Microsoft Learn student ambassadors across the world. And today's session, we're talking about the basics of Android Studio and the Android Studio with Kotlin. We're gonna go over views and creating your own cookie clicker app, right, Sarah? And you will learn the basics fundamental of designing a front end of the mobile application and an overview of how you can be using Kotlin to implement interactivity in this session. There will also be a brief introduction into Azure Cognitive Services, which you can be using to implement more complex features in your application. So this is Hussam Mohsine. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry-leading ideas and technology from Microsoft partners and the open source community. It's also the home to the Microsoft for Startups program. With a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events, there's something for everyone. Check out our calendar of events on meetup.com and join our upcoming sessions. Today's speaker is Sabiha Sheikh. Sabiha is a Gold Student Ambassador, Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador, and a recent graduate from BITS Pilani, Dubai in the UAE. She's very passionate about mobile applications development, accessibility, and building projects for social good. Quick reminder about the code of conduct in our sessions. We're all coming from different backgrounds, and let's keep this environment and space friendly for all. We're all here to learn. I'll be sharing some resources in the chat, so keep an eye on that. And that's where you can send us all your questions during the session. Towards the end, if you prefer to unmute and talk, also you can mention that to me in the chat. I'll be there moderating and keeping an eye on it. So you can also engage like that. I think that's all for the introduction. We can start the session. I'm handing over the mic back to Sabiha. Off to you.
Thank you, Hussam, and thank you everyone for joining in today. So we'll be going over how you can actually create your very first Android application in today's session. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll have an app that you can take and show to others. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can all follow along, and I'll begin sharing my presentation for you. I hope that's visible to all of you.
Yeah, all good.
All right, great. So before we get started, let's take a brief look at the agenda that we have for today. So we'll be going over the very basics of Android Studio, like what exactly is it? Why would you even be using Android Studio? Then we'll be going over any prerequisites. If you're following along today, this would be the things that you would need in order to get started. Then we'll be going over what project we'll be building today and setting up the project. The design and the layout. We'll be also choosing a few colors to go along with the project. Then we'll be going on to a bit more complex functionality, such as how do you actually make button clicks through the backend functionality. We'll then be going over to how to actually run your app on your personal device, or if it's a virtual device, how do you run it? Then we'll be taking a look at Azure Cognitive Services and where you can go if you need some further learning experiences. And then finally, we're going to end up with a Q&A where you can ask any questions that you have had towards today's session. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly is Android Studio. So Android Studio is the official IDE for developing for the Google's Android operating system. It is available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux operating systems. So if you have any of these, and you want to follow along today, you could head over to the Android Studio website and then download the version on your computer. The great part about Android Studio is that you can not only build apps for your phones, but also build for tablets and Wear and TV, as well as Android Auto. So it's kind of like an all-in-one platform to build everything Android. And then another great part is that you can also build with Java and Kotlin. So if you come from a background that you've used a lot of Java with your everyday programs, you can also use Java, which is supported by Android Studio. So this is a quick brief about Android Studio, but we'll be going more in depth when we're working on it hands-on within the next few minutes. Great. So what do you need if you're wanting to follow along in today's session? So for the session, you will need Android Studio, which you can download by just searching Android Studio, and the first link should be your direct link to the developer docs. The second would be some basic programming language. So while it's not required, it is great if you're coming with a bit of programming language because it's going to make it easier for you to catch up on some of the concepts we'll be discussing today. And an Android phone. Now, this is optional, but if you'd like to go out of this session with an app that you can show to your friends and family on your phone, then it's great if you have an Android phone. You can bring it next to you, and we'll be seeing how to actually run it on that at the end of the session. Great. So now we've looked at the prerequisites, and we'll see what we're going to be building today. So the app that we're building today is called as a cookie clicker app. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have actually played a lot of games on Play Store, but personally, I've played a lot, and I've come across this game called Cookie Clicker, which is pretty fun because you keep clicking on the cookie and you get more cookies and you can upgrade, and it's overall a fun clicker game. So we will be building a much more simpler version of that today. So it's almost like a game that you can play when you're bored. So the simpler version that we will be building today is that of a cookie where you click a button and you're going to increase the number of cookies you have. It's quite simple in terms of you have a text view that you see, you have an image of a cookie, and you have a button. And that button has some functionality which increases the cookies you have. So in this session, you're going to learn all of this and how to even maybe design your app even further. How do you add more buttons in the future? That's what we'll be learning at the end of the session. Great. So without further ado, let's actually go right into Android Studio and get started with building our app. I'm going to back out of the presentation so that you can all see the Android Studio. Great. So if this is the first time you're opening up Android Studio, this is what you would see. It's going to be a window where you can see some of the recent projects on the left side, and on the right side, you will see a few options to start a new project. So there are options to create a new project. You could click on an existing project that you already have and open it, or you can also import something from GitHub using a URL. For today's session, we will be starting a new project. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create a New Project. This would take a few seconds and it will bring up the next dialog. Here, I can choose a project template. For today's session, we'll be starting from scratch. So I'm going to choose an empty activity by clicking on that. Now, if you're really interested to work with other activities and learn about how to create login screens and such, Android Studio actually is quite cool because it actually gives you these templates to start without needing to starting from scratch. So if you scroll down further, you would actually find templates for login activities, for settings activities, scrolling activities. So these are all things you could just start and work on your app with. But for today's session, we will be using the empty activity. So I'm going to choose that and go ahead and click next. This is going to bring me to the next screen, which is about configuring your project. Since today's project is about a cookie clicker, I'm going to call my project name as Cookie Clicker. You can name it anything you like, but I'm just going to keep with the theme and call it Cookie Clicker. The second section you're going to see is called as package name. Now, package name is basically a unique identifier that identifies your app on your device. So if you were to upload this app after this tutorial to the Play Store, this would be the ID that's actually going to differentiate your application from the other applications on the market and see that this app is uniquely tied to you. To structure this, you could say it as your company name the name of the app. For me, I'm going to just use my name instead of a company name. Next section is save location. I'm going to leave this at default, but if you'd like to save it somewhere else, you can choose a different location. The language we're going to be using today is Kotlin, so I'm going to leave this at default. The last section we have is the minimum SDK. So this is the version of the Android application where, which would be the last version of Android that can run your application. So right now it's set as Android 4.4, which means that your app would run on all devices up till Android 4.4. If I click on this dropdown, I will see different options. So let's say if I choose Android 5.0, it will now tell me that your app will run approximately on 94.1% devices. So this is a great way to decide how back do you want to go to support your app. And another great way to actually figure out which version of Android should you use is using this Help Me Choose button, which is going to open up a version distribution dialog, which shows you how many phones are actually using this particular version of Android. And if you click on any other version, it will show you what new features come along with that function as well. So this is a great place you can click to learn more information before you actually create your application. Great. So once you have all of this configured, you would click on Finish. It would take you a few minutes to actually set up this Android Studio project. So for today's session, I've already created a base Android Studio project in order to make this process a bit quicker. So I'm going to go back and open up the new project that I had created earlier. And it's going to take a few seconds to bring that up and load it onto my Android Studio. Another great thing you could do right after this session is actually go back and explore the different templates that Android Studio offers. So it might be great to show your first login screen to someone by using one of the Android templates. So that's always something you could go back and do right after this session. While that gets set up, let's head back to the presentation and just see what would be the next thing we would do. So we just set up our first project in Android Studio, which is still currently setting up in the background. So let's see what's the next thing we could do while that sets up. The next thing we would do is setting up a layout. So anytime I go to the Play Store, I'm always looking for apps with great UI, which are quite intuitive to use as well as fun. So I think the next step for all of us should be actually setting up the design for our application. If you take a look at the GIF that we have on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a title called Cookie Clicker. There is an image for a cookie, and then there is a nice little button that says Click Me, which on clicking gives me a different count each time, which is one more than the previous count. So this session, we're actually going to take a look at how to do all of this within Android Studio. So heading back to our Android Studio project once more. Let's see if that's, so it looks like it's setting up and loading everything that we have. And if this is the first time you're actually following along and opening up your Android Studio project, it would take a few more minutes. Usually for the very first time, it takes a few minutes, but every subsequent time it loads a bit faster. So we can see that there are activities at the top and tabs that are all loading up right now. And we can see our main activity, and we can see also our activity underscore main.xml. So if this is the first time that you are looking at Android Studio, it might feel a bit intimidating, especially because there's so many different tabs. You can see there are tabs on the left side that say Project, Resource Manager, and also tabs at the top that say Activity Main XML and Main Activity XML. So how do you actually know which tabs do you use? Where do you actually design your application? So we are actually going to go over each of these very quickly, but also quite thoroughly so that you know where exactly to change a particular thing. So when you actually open up your first application, you're going to see two tabs that are going to auto-generate for you at the top. So you will have activity underscore main.xml, and you will also have main activity.kt, which would already be open when you first open the app. So I'm going to minimize the side section to just give this a bit more space and expand that so you could all see that clearly. And let's start off by looking at the components you would need to actually set up the layout. So this is activity underscore main.xml, and here is where you will be designing the layout. So the different sections here, starting off from the left, we can see a section called palette. This has the most common views that you could use in your application. So if you actually take a look, there is a tab that says common and something called as TextView, button, ImageView. So these are all views that you can actually directly take from here and drag onto the canvas in order to add it to your app. The next section you have is the component tree. Here is where you can see a hierarchy of everything that's on your app screen. So currently, there is just one thing on the screen that's called Hello World. This generates every time you create a new app. And you can see that it's already there in the component tree. So this is a great way to see what different elements or views that you have in your app screen. You could just see it on the component tree. Another area is when I actually click on a particular element, there is a section on the right side called attributes. If I click on that, it expands this window, which lets me add additional attributes to this piece of view which I selected. So since this view is a text view, I can see all the different aspects related to that view, which I can change, such as the text color, text size, and so on. We will be revisiting this in a few more minutes after we get a better understanding of these windows. The last thing we have at the top is these three options that says code, split, and design at the top right corner. Currently, we are in the design view. That's letting us just drag and drop elements onto the canvas. But if I were to switch over to another view, let's say code, I would see a list of the XML code that I have currently. So if you already know a bit of XML, you can also write your UI code with XML. The other option we have is split. This gives you an option to write the XML code while viewing the design on the right side. So while for today's tutorial, we will not be doing this in XML, this is something to explore, and it's a great way to learn more about Android Studio. So I'm going to head back to design, and let's actually see a little bit about these views that we have. So we know we're going to use text view, button view, and an image view, as well as we know that there is a layout that's something called as constraint layout here in the hierarchy. So before we even start dragging components onto the screen, I think it's important that we just take a minute and understand what these components are. So I'm going to head back to the presentation where I'm going to show you a quick brief about each of these items. So we know our layout now, and we're going to take a look at what are the different types of layouts that you can have in Android Studio. So these are the three most common ones, which a lot of people use when they're creating their applications. The first one is the linear layout. And this basically aligns any child views, which are basically views you put within this layout, either vertically or horizontally. So you can see in the image how there's an example. So it could align your views in that manner. The second one is relative layout that allows you to align an element with respect to something else. So you could say that you want your text view to come below a button, and you could define that using a relative layout and some XML code. The last one is the constraint layout, and this is the most popular type of layout. One of the main reasons is because it adapts really well with different device sizes. So if you make your app for an Android phone with a very small screen size, it will also adapt really well for an Android phone with a huge screen size. With the layout itself, it's quite similar to relative layout, but it offers a lot of flexibility. Here you can also define constraints for the vertical side as well as horizontally. So we're going to be using constraint layout in today's tutorial. The next thing we can take a look at is what are views? So we've already heard about text views, image views, and button views. So moving on to text view, it's quite basic. As the name suggests, it is used to actually display the text in your application. The text could have different styles, different sizes, and all of this could also be defined in the attributes of that particular view. So we'll be using this with the title of the cookie clicker and also to display the count that we have each time increasing in our application. The next one we have is the image view. The image view would be used to display images. So for us, we will be displaying a cookie image using this view. All the images such as PNGs or shapes, they're all stored in a folder called drawable, which we'll also be taking a look at in Android Studio. To actually add an image, we would be using something called as a resource manager to import images into Android Studio. So as decided, we would be using an image of a cookie in today's tutorial, and we'll be using the image view to allow us to do that. The last item we need is the button. And a button is basically an element that you can tap to perform an action. So for us, we have a click me button, which when we tap increases the amount of cookies we have. Great, so now that we have a good understanding of the views, let's actually head back into our Android Studio project and begin creating these visual layouts that we just decided. So just to aid to actually creating the views, I have a picture of the app that's the very final app to refer as we go along. So the first thing we need is the text. So before we get started, let's just delete the one that we have right now by pressing on it and pressing the delete key. Now we need a title. So I'm going to choose TextView here, drag and drop onto my canvas. And this is going to create a text view. We can see on the hierarchy, there is a text view that shows up now. And there's also one that shows up on the canvas. Now let's actually click the attributes pane. This expands the properties related to this view. So if I scroll, I would see a property called text. So currently it says text view. Now we wanted to see the title. So I'm going to type in cookie clicker as the new title, which if you notice has just changed the title here. Next thing I will do is constrain this. So I'm going to use these bubbles that we see on screen, drag the right bubble to the right side, the left bubble to the left side, and the top to the top. What this does is ensure that on any other screen size, this would be the same view that you will be seeing. So I've just dragged these bubbles to the side and then just drag the text view a little bit towards the bottom from the top. And there we have our first text view. The next thing we need is the image view. Now, before we drag the image view and choose an image, we would first need to import that image into Android Studio. To do that, if you take a look at the left side, there is an option for Resource Manager. If you click on that, it will expand it. And this is a place that you will be adding any images that you want. I'm going to click on plus, and I will see options to import different types of image resources. I could add an image asset, a vector asset, a drawable resource file, and so on. But today, we're going to keep it very simple. We're just going to import a PNG file. So I'm going to click on Import Drawables, and I'm going to select the cookie PNG. And I'm going to give it a name, if not already there. And one thing to note is that the image file itself should all be lowercase in order for it to be imported. I could click Next then. Here I get prompted that this particular image would be added under the folder that says drawable. So as we came across earlier that every resource which is an image would be added under drawable. So this is a good visual view of that. So now since I've already imported this, I'm not going to import, but if you would like to import, just click on the import button and it would add it directly to the resource manager that we have. So I'm going to click cancel because I already have that image here imported. So next thing I would need to do is drag the image view in. So again, the step that you would need to do is click on the particular view, drag it onto the canvas, and choose the image that you need. So here there are a lot of images, but the one that we need is the cookie image. Choose that and press OK. As soon as you do that, you would see the image of the cookie show up on screen. And it's quite huge, so I'm going to make this a bit smaller by using the controls that I have at the end of the image. Like that. And maybe even making it a bit more smaller. I think that looks well, goes well with the rest of the views. Again, the next thing you would have to do is constrain this. So I'm going to use the bubbles that I see, drag it to the right side, drag it to the left side, drag the top of this image to the bottom of the text view. and then just move it a little bit towards the bottom. This is going to create a bit of space between them. So now we have a title, we have an image, and the next thing we need is a count. So I'm going to again drag a text view below the image that I have, drag the bubbles that I see here, right side to the left side, and right below the image view. So this is going to add a text view for the count. Currently it says text view, so I want to change the text. I'm going to click on that, change the text by finding the text attribute here. And I'm going to change this to count and put it like this. And as soon as I do that, you can see the text has changed here. Great. So the last thing we need now is a button that when you click increases the count each time. So I'm going to drag the button, which is again in common, and the button here. I'm going to drag and drop. And again, I'm going to constrain this, the bubble at the right side to the right side of the parent, bubble on the left side to the left side of the parent, and the one at the top to right below the count. Great. So now that we have our button, let's change what the button says. Now in the image, we had something that says click me, but let's be a bit more descriptive and let's call this more cookies. Great. So with that, we have all of the basic things set up, such as the title, we have the image, we have another count, and then we have a button. So let's head back to our presentation to see what we can do next. So now that we have everything set up, we are going to now work on our colors. So as we saw in the image that we had earlier, they were really nice colors that we had chosen. So something which was purple, pink, and we also have like a purplish neon that was going on. So let's actually bring in these colors and use them in our app. To do that, it's quite simple. First, let's head to the project directory view. So click on the top left corner that says project. This is going to expand this project section. And you're going to see this view that has Android at the top, and you have these directories. So first, we're going to start off by expanding this directory, expanding the folder that says res, and expanding the folder that says values. And then finding the file that says colors.xml. And I'm going to double click this. This is where you will be actually adding extra colors that you might want to use with your app throughout. To make this a bit easier, I've already imported the hex codes for the app that we need today. I've called this purple medium, pink light, and purple neon, and added in the hex codes we saw in the presentation earlier. The format is quite simple. These ones at the top were already imported with the application when you create a new app. These ones at the bottom I added by creating a similar syntax, which was color name equals to, and then you give it a particular name. It could be any name as long as you remember it, and adding the hex code and then a closing tag. So once you actually have declared the colors within colors.xml, you can use them throughout your application. So in order to go back to my layout view, I will click the tab at the top that says activity_main. This is going to take me back to the view we had earlier, which looks good, but not as good. I think we could make this better with a few colors. So let's start off. Let's actually first design the title that we see. The first thing I would like to do is increase the size because it looks quite small right now. So I click on it, scroll down on the attributes pane, and find the property that says text size. To increase the size, I will click the drop-down, select a larger size. So I've chosen 24 SP and maybe even 30 SP. It would make it stand out. So I've chosen 30 SP. This would make the size quite big. The next thing I want to do is actually make the background color of this pink. To do that, I could search for the property that says background. One way I could do this is actually keep scrolling until I find it, or I could use the search bar at the very top that says search. If I click that, I can actually type in the property that I'm searching. So I want to make the background of this pink. So I'm going to search for background, which shows me that property. Here, I'm going to type in the color I want. So that's pink light. Remember, we defined this in the colors.xml. So if you head back, you will see this property called pink light, which we give this hex value to. I'm going to head back to activity main. The next thing I want to do is actually make this quite wide, because right now this background is coming only on this particular section, which is the section of the text. To make it wider, I'm going to get rid of the search that I had, and I will see this property called layout width. I'm going to choose the dropdown and select 0 dp. This is going to make sure that the size or the width is basically spanning all the way across the parent. Remember, to actually change any of these attributes, you need to first select the view that you want to change the attributes for. So if you don't select anything, the view that you're going to see is for the constraint layout. Great. Now that we have that, we want to center align this. So let's search for the center align property. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit until I find that this time. So I can see something called as text alignment. If I click on align center, I can see that the alignment is right now at the center. Great. So we have our title right here. The next thing, I think our image looks fine, so we're going to keep it at that. And then we have our count. So let's actually first change the background before we go even further down. So let's change the background by clicking on constraint layout to select that. I'm going to search for background. And this time, we're going to give the background a nice purple color. So I'm going to type in purple here, and you can see Android Studio is being helpful, and it's giving you a drop-down to choose from. I'll choose purple medium, which was a new color that we defined. As soon as I do that and press enter, I can see that the color has changed and giving us a nice purple to work with. So we have our title, we have our background, and next thing would be working on the count text. Right now, it's not very visible with the new background that we have. So we're going to click on that. And this time, change the color of the text. So I'm going to search for color. I can see a property that says text color, which if I click, it's going to open up a different few colors that I can choose from. I'm going to choose white, press OK, and this is going to change the color of that text. Next thing we could change is the text size. So I'm going to click on it again, scroll down a bit this time, and find that property that says text size, which is right here. I'm now going to choose the dropdown and then increase the size to something such as 24 sp. Great, so now we have a title, an image, and the new count design that we just created. The last thing we would change is the actual button. To do that, click on the button. And for the button, we're going to change a slightly different property. This is called background tint. We're going to click on that section, tap the little button you see next to it, and choose the color that you want. So I'm going to give the color pink. So as soon as I do that, I can see the new color show up. Now with this pink, the white on the text is a bit less readable. So I'm going to click this and change that to black. To do that again, you can search for color. I can find something called as text color. Click on the button next to it. I'm going to make this black. So with that, we have basically changed the design for a few of the elements that we have. The quickest way to change any property of an element would just be to click on it, and then within the attributes tab, just find the attribute that you want to change, and you can change it directly there. Great. So before we head back and see what's the next thing to do, let's actually add something called as an ID. An ID is used to uniquely identify each of these views, which is shown here. You might think, why do we need to uniquely identify these views? That's actually because in the future, if you want to use any of these views or refer to any of these views anywhere else in the application, Having an ID makes it quite easy to refer to them. So I'm going to choose the title here, and the ID is the very first property that you see when you choose it and click the attributes window. Here, I'm going to change the ID to something like cookie title, and then press enter. As soon as I do that, you would see an option to refactor, which would allow you to change this text. I'm going to show that for each of these elements again. So if I click the image view, I can choose here, change the view to something else, view ID to something else. So cookie in view. I'm going to press enter. This is going to open up this window that says rename. You click on refactor, and the refactor ensures that any other occurrence of this ID is also changed. Next is the count. I'm going to click on that again. Type in here the name. So I'm going to call this count result. Click refactor. And the last one we have is this button. I'm going to click on that. I will call the ID of this cookie button. Click enter. This is going to give me this option again, and I'm going to click refactor. Great. So with that, we have a design, we have nice IDs which allow us to refer to this particular components anywhere within the application. So let's head back and see what is the next thing we can work on. So the next thing we need is the count functionality. If you take a look at the sample we had, every time we clicked click me, it would increase the count and then change it in the count text that we see on screen. To make this a bit more simpler, I've broken this down into 3 questions that we need to figure out the answers to. The first one is, how do you track the count? Because we need somehow to store the count in order to increase it. The second one is, how do you increase the count only on button click? We don't want it such that if someone clicks on the image, the count increases. We only want it to increase when that button is tapped. The third one is, how do you change the count in the text view each time? So while we might have stored the count somewhere, we still wanted to kind of change the text that's shown on screen. So these are the 3 questions that we're going to work on answering now. So let's head back to the Android Studio and work on this. So in order to add any sort of backend code to our application, the main place we would be doing it is in mainActivity.kt. This is a tab that's already opened up when you first start a new project. So I'm going to switch over to that tab by clicking it at the top, and I will see that there is some sample boilerplate code that's already there for us. So let's take a look at what it is. Although it may look quite complicated, it's very simple. So having a read, we can see that there's something called as onCreate, and inside that there is something called as setContentView layout.main. So this snippet basically makes sure that every time this activity is created, the layout is set to activity_main. And activity_main was where we designed it. So this snippet basically ensures that the XML file that we worked on earlier is connected to this activity, which allows us to again set button on click listeners, change the text. So this is the part of code that actually connects them. Great. So now that we have a bit of understanding on that, let's start answering those questions. Our first question was, how do we actually save the count? So here, if you have a bit of programming knowledge, it would be helpful. But if not, I'm just going to make a bit easier for you by explaining the basics. So in order to store the count, we would be storing it in something called as a variable. In Kotlin, you can declare a variable like this. So I'm going to write in var count result value equals 0. So initially, I'm going to define this count result as 0. Great. So now we are going to then try to find a way to interact with the button. To do that, it's quite simple. I'm going to first head back to the layout view to see what we called our button. So if I click on the button, I can see the ID we declared. It was called as cookie button. So if you recall correctly, the ID is something that you will be using throughout the application in order to refer to it, in order to work with it, like setting on-click listeners and so on. So if I head back to the main activity, here, I'm going to basically try to connect with that button. To do that, we're going to be using something called as find view by ID. So within onCreate, I'm going to type in a bit of Kotlin code. So I'm going to type in val. I will call it the button. This is equals find view by ID r.id.cookie button. Now this is going to import the button type automatically. And this snippet of code, what it does is it finds that button with that ID and it assigns it to this particular variable that we have created. The difference between val and var, one of it set as var can be changed in subsequent edits, whereas val cannot be actually changed. So once you actually declare it, you cannot really change this in the future. Great. So now that we have our cookie button and then we have our count result value, the next thing we need to actually do is set an on-click listener. And that's quite simple as well. So I'm going to type in cookie button dot, and I'm going to type in set on click listener. And now you can see that Android Studio is being again quite helpful, showing me all the options that I could choose from. So I'm going to choose set on click listener. And then I'm going to replace these two brackets with these curly brackets. And then add in something such as increase count. Basically a function that would run each time the button is clicked. So coming back here, so let's go over this bit once more because it might seem a bit complicated. So first thing we did is try to get that particular button with this ID by using this piece of Kotlin code. The second thing is we're setting an on-click listener on it, and anything inside this bracket is going to run every time you click the button. So right now I've added something called as increase count. And if I actually take a look at the error that Android Studio is throwing, it's saying that increase count doesn't really exist. And it gives an option that says create this increase count function. So I'll just click on that and it creates this automatically for me. So this is quite helpful, especially with Android Studio, because you don't have to write a lot of extra code because Android Studio is quite helpful with that. So this increase count is basically a function, which is a piece of reusable code you could use throughout your application or this particular activity. And you can see that it's created something called increase count with just some text that says to do, not yet implemented. So I'm going to get rid of this. And let's actually revisit what we want to do when we click that button. So when we click that button, we want that count value to increase. So I know that I declared the count value in this particular variable. So I'm going to copy this variable, add it here, and add a increment statement of +1. This particular snippet increases the value of the count result each time the button is clicked, because each time the button is clicked, it calls increase count, and increase count has the increment statement. So that might be quite difficult to understand if if this is your first time and you haven't really checked out any programming before, but hopefully this explanation was a bit easier to make it understand for you. The next thing we need is how do you actually increase the text view that we see here that says count. So to do that, I'm going to head back to the main activity. I'm now going to declare the text view similar to how we call the button. So one way we could do it is within this onCreate function, but if we do that, we would not be able to access this outside of this function. That's why we will be declaring it globally, which is right next to count result value. To do that, we will type a bit more of Kotlin code. We're going to use something called as late init var that lets us actually initialize this at a later stage. So I'm going to call this count text, and this is a type TextView. So this actually allows you to declare a particular variable and use it and actually use it at a later point. So here I've added this and I pressed Alt Enter in order to import the necessary imports for that. And then as soon as I have that, I am now going to actually link this variable with that find view by ID. So I'm going to press enter and just link that here. So I'm going to say count text equals to, again, find view by ID, r.id dot, I believe we called it count result. So to just check, I'm going to go back, click on this. The ID was count result. And that way we are able to basically link this find view by ID with this particular variable. So now that we've selected both of these, the next step would actually be to change that count text each time the button is clicked. So to do that, we know that we are changing the count in increase count. So we are going to be adding that statement here itself. So I'm going to add in count text here, dot text equals something like that, plus count result value. Now, as soon as you do this, you would see that Android Studio automatically highlights this piece of code as orange. If you want to figure out why, just hover over it. It would give you a little explanation. It says, don't concatenate text displayed with set text. Use resource string with placeholders. So one thing we could actually do to make this a bit better is declare any strings we're using here in a separate file on Android Studio called strings.xml. It's usually a good idea to declare the strings there because in case in the future you want to make your app for multiple languages, having all that strings in one place allows for easier translation and adding different translation files. So that's why we're not going to do count text.text equals to something. Instead, we're going to declare this string in the file called strings.xml. To find that file, I'm going to go to Project tab. And we already have this open here. But if you don't have this open, click on the rest folder again, click on values, and find the file that says strings.xml. I'm going to double click this, and it is going to open up the strings.xml file, which already has our very first string that's called cookie clicker app for our app. In order to add an additional string, I've just kept this here in order to make it a bit faster. I've just commented it out, so I'll uncomment this. And I've created a string called count underscore result underscore string that says count and then %d. So %d would actually let us pass an integer each time to that string in order to change it. So this is a string that you would have to declare in strings.xml. That way we could do it with the best practices. So as soon as you have just created this, a quick way to actually duplicate a string line could be just typing in Control-D, which duplicates this particular line. So this is a nice shortcut to know. But right now we already have that string declared here. So we're going to head back to our main activity.kt. We're going to get rid of this text here and find a way to actually get the text from strings.xml instead. To do that, we would type in get string. And we see again, there are a few options that show up. I'm going to choose the first one. And I'm going to type in the string that we want to get. So r.string dot, the name of the string was count underscore result underscore string. Then I'm going to pass in the count result value. So I'm going to put a comma. The second value that I pass is the count result value. And then I press enter. This lets us basically use that string and pass this count result value, which is going to go from here into this %d and display it as count. And then it displays that particular value. So this might be a lot to take in, but I hope this was quite clear to you. So I'm going to actually head back to the presentation where I've taken a snippet of this, and we're going to go over one final time and then move on to the next step. So heading back to the presentation, here is the basic code to make our button work. So we have a result text. The naming is a bit different in this, but it serves the same functionality. So we have the result text, which is basically our view that shows the count. We have the result cookies, which is our final cookie count. We have the increment button, which is the cookie button that we just created that says more cookies. We have the result text, which is going to show the actual text to the screen. And then we have the set on click listener, which calls a function called increment cookie, which is where anything we put is going to run every time the button is clicked. Great. So now that we have a bit of backend code set up, let's move on to the very final section, which is how do we actually run the application? So it's quite simple, but there are two ways that you could do this in. So in Android Studio, if you look at the bar at the very top, you would see this option that is next to an elephant called AVD Manager. It looks like a little Android logo and a phone. So if you click on that, it opens up something called as Android Virtual Device Manager. Here, you can create a virtual emulator. So if you don't have an Android phone, you can actually create a virtual device which can run this application for you. To create a virtual device, you can click on Create Virtual Device. And then it's going to give you a lot of options to choose from. So you could choose different phone types like Pixel XL, you could choose Pixel 4, or if you're creating apps for something else like the Wear OS, you can click on that and you have options for that as well. So if I were to choose phone, Pixel, next, I would then have to select the system image, then click next, and then review my final changes by clicking finish. But the other way, which I'm going to show now, so I'm going to cancel out of this, but this is one way you could set up your device. The second way is actually using a physical emulator. So a physical device that you have, you can actually connect to it. To do that, you would just have to use a USB cable, connect it to your laptop, and I'm just going to try to project this on to the screen so that you are able to view it as well. So I am now going to just project this onto the screen by using the Windows tool to project. And in order to actually set up your physical device with Android Studio, there is one step that you need to do, which is going into the About phone, selecting your build number and tapping on it 7 times, which actually enables the developer mode. And after that, you can turn on debugging. Now, to do that, it's quite simple, and there are a lot of Android developer docs that let you or guide you through that process. So that's something you would have to do if you're using a physical device. But if you're using a virtual device, you could actually directly do everything within Android Studio. So I'm going to just share the application once that I've run on my phone, so that you could see how it looks after all of our different code that we've written. So we can see that there is something called as cookie clicker. We now tap to click on the cookies. We can see that our count is increasing, which is great because that's what we wanted it to do. And we can also see the different styles we had created. So within just these few simple steps, we were able to set up and run our Android application. So while this might be your very first time working with Android apps, there is a lot more to learn apart from this. And we're going to share a little bit of some of the complex things you can actually do. One of the things you could do is using Azure Cognitive Services to make your applications more smarter. So you could use some of the AI services such as speech to text, text to speech, such that, let's say you create an Android application that has a recording functionality. So you could use the Azure API to make it transcribe something you're speaking. Or you could also use computer vision and custom vision APIs, such that if you take a picture of a plant, it's able to recognize what plant it is. So the Azure Cognitive APIs are great in terms of it gives you a lot of artificial intelligence, machine learning functionalities with just a call to an API. And this is a great place to start if you want to make smarter applications which don't take as much time as well. So with the Azure Cognitive Services, there are four main categories. So we have the decision, we have language, speech APIs, and the vision APIs. Personally, I've used a lot of vision APIs, which give you really cool applications. So it might be something that you can explore right after this session. Finally, some other learning material. We have the Azure Fundamentals Learning Path, which is a great place to start before you even use the computer vision APIs, because it gives you a good introduction to what actually is your is Azure for, and how can you get started with creating an Azure account. The second one is digital accessibility. With so many different applications coming out and web apps that you're creating, it's a great idea to keep in mind the population that might not be able to access this app with similar ease. So making sure that you have good contrast with the application's color scheme that you use, making sure that you add alt text. These are all good things to keep in mind. And this learning path actually has great resources on how to get started with being a bit more accessible with your applications. The next two are also great resources for some advanced Android learning. So you have the Google Code Labs, which are, again, quite interactive. You can create a lot of applications through this, and there are a few videos that help you follow along as well. Then we have Developing Android Apps with Kotlin, which is a Udacity course that guides you through creating basic Android applications and also a bit of knowledge about Kotlin itself. With that, I believe I'll just hand it over to Hussam to take over again. But thank you all for tuning in. And I hope that this session was quite useful for you. And you can ask any questions that you have in the chat.
Thank you, Sabiha. And yeah, we have a chance to take some questions. If you would like to be audible, please mention that on the chat and I will enable that feature for you. I dropped some links here in the chat for you to continue the journey and learn on Microsoft Learn. There are few Learn modules and paths that Sabiha mentioned and recommended for you to learn more. So please continue the journey after the session and explore these links. I also sent some survey links to understand more from you the topics and the sessions that you might be interested in the future. So also you can share your feedback on that. Jay has a question on the minimum SDK. So it says that, does the minimum SDK you pick affect the inherent security safety of the application?
So mainly with the minimum SDK, if you choose something that's lower, you would have lesser of the newer features. There might be a few security flaws that don't, like, since Android tends to fix it with the newer versions. So it's usually recommended that you try to make it a later version. But as far as I know, Android tries to make sure that each version is secure. So there won't be any very obvious security flaws. So that's a good thing. But if you need some of the newer features which come with the newer versions of Android, then you would tend to have to use something that's more later version, like maybe Android 5.0 or 6 and so on.
All right, yeah. So a quick one here. I mentioned that there is a follow-on session happening tomorrow also with a Learn Student Ambassador, Vijaya. She's going to talk us through more cognitive services and how we can get started implementing these in the applications. So I see a few questions maybe coming through. Please, if you also would like to be on audio, mention that we can stick around here for a couple of more minutes to make sure that we covered all your questions. And yeah, as you know, the session is recorded and it will be available later on our YouTube channel. I'll drop that link also in the chat for you to make sure to subscribe and not miss the playback. Oh, thank you, Pratik. I thought you're gonna ask a question. All right. I think that's all for today. Thank you, Sabiha, for joining us today and sharing your experience with the community. And we're excited to have you here with us. And I know that you're graduating from the program and pursuing your journey and advocating more for technology. So I wish you all the best with that. We will look forward to having you in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. And thank you for everyone who tuned in today. It was great to interact with you. And I hope you continue your journey building more Android apps. And all the best.
Thank you. All right, stay safe, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.